It's strange, the things you remember. Not the big, cinematic explosions or the scream of incoming rounds, but the quiet moments. The way the light hit Chris's dusty helmet as we hunkered down, or the smell of his stale coffee breath when he'd whisper a joke to get me through. Those were the anchors in the chaos. And after, when the chaos was internal, rattling around my skull like shrapnel, Chris was still there. My rock, my brother, my compass in a world that felt like it had spun off its axis the moment my boots touched civilian soil. I was 35, a former Army Ranger, living in Tampa, Florida, and honestly, mostly just existing. PTSD was a constant hum beneath my skin, a low-grade tremor that occasionally erupted into full-blown earthquakes. I'd found a semblance of peace, or at least a safe harbor, in a veterans support group at the local VA. A circle of men who understood the language of silence and the weight of unspoken things. Chris was usually there, sometimes just to lean against the wall, a solid, reassuring presence. We'd seen some things, Chris and I, things that knit us together with invisible, unbreakable threads. I trusted him with my life, literally and figuratively. He was the one who could always cut through the noise when my mind started to betray me. Then Eleanor walked in. Dr. Eleanor Vance, new therapist at our VA clinic, specializing in trauma recovery. She was striking. I remember thinking that the first time I saw her. Not Hollywood beautiful, but sharp, poised, with eyes that seemed to hold a kind of deep, knowing calm. She had this way of listening, a slight tilt of her head, a genuine curve to her lips that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, the only one who mattered. She moved with an easy grace, her dark hair often pulled back in a severe, professional bun that somehow only emphasized the softness of her gaze. I was skeptical, of course. Trust didn't come easy to me anymore. But she had a way of cutting through the usual therapist jargon, getting straight to the heart of what gnawed at me. She understood the veteran experience, or at least she presented it that way. She talked about moral injury, the invisible wounds, things no one else had ever quite articulated for me. I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long time. It was like she held a key to a locked room inside me, and slowly, carefully, she began to turn it. Our sessions became a lifeline. I looked forward to them, the quiet hum of her office, the way the late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds. She'd offer a soft smile, a reassuring hand on my arm sometimes. Nothing overtly professional, but just enough to convey warmth. She seemed to peel back the layers of scar tissue, not with a scalpel, but with a gentle, patient hand. She made me feel less broken, more understood. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could actually heal. The red flags, looking back, were so subtle they felt like whispers in the wind. A passing comment about my reliance on Chris. She'd say, almost casually, that while it was wonderful to have such a strong bond, sometimes, just sometimes, those bonds could inadvertently hinder individual growth. She'd frame it as me needing to find my own 2 feet, my own inner strength, without leaning on anyone else as a crutch. It sounded logical, empowering even. I absorbed her words, trusted her insight. After all, she was the expert, right? I started to view my friendship with Chris through her lens. When he'd offer to come with me to a group meeting, I'd hesitate, remembering Eleanor's words. I started pushing him away, subtly at first, then more overtly. I told myself it was for my own good, to become more independent. Chris, bless his heart, would just look at me with those bewildered, kind eyes and say something like, "Mac, whatever you need, man. I'm here." He never pushed, never questioned, just let me create the distance. Then the destabilizing events started to accelerate. Eleanor began inviting Chris to consultation sessions, or at least that's what she called them when I asked. She said it was crucial for her to understand my entire support system, to get a holistic view of my recovery. It made sense, in a twisted sort of way. I was a complex case, she often reminded me, and a multifaceted approach was necessary. Chris, ever eager to help me, readily agreed. But something shifted after those sessions. Chris became different, more distant, sometimes, or overly solicitous, in a way that felt forced. He'd repeat some of Eleanor's therapeutic phrases back to me. Things like, "Mac, you need to process this on your own," or, "You're strong enough to stand alone." It was like Eleanor's voice was echoing through him, and it made my skin crawl. He'd never talked like that before. Our conversations, once easy and free-flowing, now felt stilted, always circling back to my growth or independence. The psychological pressure mounted. Eleanor started suggesting that my connection to Chris was actually an unhealthy form of codependency, born from shared trauma. She painted it as a barrier to my progress. She'd say it with such a gentle, empathetic voice, her eyes full of concern, that I couldn't help but believe her. She was my therapist, my guide. She knew what was best. I began to feel isolated, truly isolated, even when Chris was around. The one person I had always counted on felt like he was slipping away, and worse, he was doing it with Eleanor's blessing. My own perception of reality started to fray at the edges. Was my friendship with Chris truly a crutch? Was I hindering myself? My sleep suffered. I'd wake in cold sweats, the old nightmares returning with a vengeance, but now overlaid with a new kind of dread. A fear that I was losing my mind, that I couldn't trust my own judgment, my own feelings. Eleanor, sensing my increasing anxiety, would just nod knowingly, attributing it to the difficult but necessary work we were doing. She'd prescribe calming exercises, suggest meditation, always steering me away from talking about Chris directly, subtly reinforcing that I was the problem, I was the one who needed to change. The gaslighting was masterful. She'd make me doubt my memories, my reactions. If I expressed discomfort about Chris spending time with her, she'd turn it around. "Marcus," she'd say, "is this perhaps a symptom of your abandonment issues? Or, it sounds like you're projecting some of your past anxieties onto Chris." Her words were like tiny scalpels, carving away at my self-belief, leaving me raw and exposed. I felt like a puzzle that had been meticulously put together, only for someone to secretly swap out half the pieces, leaving me with a distorted image I could barely recognize. The betrayal, when it finally hit, came not with a bang, but with the silent flash of a screen. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those days where the Florida heat felt like a physical weight, pressing down on everything. I had just finished a particularly draining session with Eleanor. She had been talking about the importance of setting boundaries, of standing on my own 2 feet. She'd even mentioned Chris again, in the context of how much progress I was making now that I was detaching from unhealthy patterns. I walked out of her office, feeling wrung out, confused, but also a strange sense of hope that I was finally on the right path. My mind was buzzing, a jumble of her therapeutic mantras and my own lingering doubts. I needed to call Chris, just to hear his voice, even if it was just to argue, just to feel some solid ground. I pulled out my phone as I walked towards the parking lot. That's when I saw it. Eleanor had left her office door slightly ajar. I glanced in, and there, on her desk, was her phone, screen up, glowing with a new message notification. I don't know why I looked. Maybe it was some primal instinct, a tiny voice screaming that something was wrong. My eyes scanned the screen, and the words froze me in place. It was a text from Eleanor. To Chris. Asterisk, can't wait for our coffee tomorrow. He's been really struggling with his manageable dependency lately. Your insights were invaluable. Asterisk, the world tilted. Manageable dependency. My dependency. On Chris. She was talking about me. To Chris. Like I was a case study, a predictable variable in her grand experiment. The words echoed in my head, cold, clinical, devoid of all the empathy she'd shown me. My stomach dropped like a stone. The air felt thin, sharp, cutting. All the whispers, all the subtle shifts, all the confusing advice suddenly coalesced into a horrifying, crystal clear picture. It was all a lie. I don't remember walking back into her office. I don't remember picking up her phone, my fingers trembling so hard I thought I'd drop it. I just remember the rage, cold and absolute, flooding my veins. I remember Eleanor's startled gasp as she looked up from her computer, her polite, professional mask cracking. She saw her phone in my hand, saw the message on the screen. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic, quickly replaced by something hard and calculating. She stood up, composed herself. "Marcus," she said, her voice unnaturally calm, "what are you doing?" My voice, when it came, felt foreign, scraped raw. Manageable dependency? That's what I am to you. A controllable problem? She tried to take the phone. I stepped back. My heart was pounding, a drum solo of betrayal in my chest. I heard footsteps in the hall, Chris's familiar stride. He paused at the door, saw me holding Eleanor's phone, saw the fury in my eyes, and something in his own face shifted from concern to a sickening, gut-wrenching shame. "Chris," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "did you know? Did you know she was doing this?" Eleanor stepped in front of Chris, shielding him, her posture suddenly rigid, defensive. "Marcus," she said, "this is inappropriate. You are overreacting. Chris was only trying to help you, to understand your complexities." Complexities? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You were seducing him, weren't you? Under the guise of helping me. You were twisting his loyalty, turning him against me, so you could isolate me." Eleanor's mask completely dissolved then. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. She looked at me, not with the compassionate gaze of a therapist, but with the cold, assessing stare of a predator whose prey had just woken up. "Chris," she said, her voice cutting, "tell him. Tell him you sought me out. Tell him you needed comfort." Chris stood frozen, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, guilt, fear, confusion. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He wouldn't look at me. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until finally, he mumbled, "Mac. I, I didn't know." He didn't know. Didn't know he was being used, that he was part of a larger, colder scheme. But the words Eleanor said, her demand for him to confess his seeking her out for comfort, confirmed it all. The clandestine meetings, the altered behavior, the echoing of her words. He had sought comfort from my therapist, the woman who was supposed to be healing me. The air left my lungs in a rush. It was like I'd been punched in the gut, a deep, sickening blow that reverberated through every fiber of my being. My combat buddy, my rock, the man who had once shielded me from bullets, now complicit in my psychological dismantling. I dropped her phone. It clattered to the carpet, the screen still glowing, still displaying the damning message. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room started to spin, the walls pressing in. The hum beneath my skin exploded into a full-blown earthquake, tremors shaking me from the inside out. My vision blurred. I could feel the old fear returning, the paranoia, the absolute certainty that I was losing my grip on reality. I turned and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't yell. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, through the waiting room, past the receptionist's surprised glance, out into the blinding Florida sun. The heat felt unbearable, scorching my skin, but I was shivering. My world had just shattered. Everything I thought was true, every piece of stability I had painstakingly built, was gone. The days that followed were a blur of darkness. I crawled into myself, retreating to the deepest, most suffocating corners of my mind. The PTSD flared up, worse than it had ever been. Nightmares became waking visions. Every shadow held a threat. Every casual glance felt like an accusation. I stopped answering my phone. I stopped eating. The weight of the betrayal was crushing, a physical pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I questioned everything. My judgment, my ability to read people, my own worth. If Chris, my brother, could betray me, who could I ever trust? Who was I, if not the man who leaned on his friends, the man whose bonds were his strength? I was back in the black, a place I had fought so hard to escape. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eleanor, the trauma specialist, had pushed me deeper into my trauma than any battlefield ever could. One morning, after a particularly brutal night, I found myself staring at the ceiling, tears silently tracking paths down my temples into my ears. My body ached, my head pounded, but beneath all the despair, a tiny, defiant spark ignited. A flicker of anger, not just at Eleanor or even at Chris, but at myself for letting it happen. For letting myself be so thoroughly manipulated, for allowing my vulnerabilities to be weaponized. That anger, raw and hot, was the first thing that felt real in weeks. It was exhausting, but it was also a tiny sign of life. I remembered something another veteran in my old support group had said long before Eleanor. You gotta hit rock bottom before you can bounce back. I was definitely at rock bottom. I picked up my phone, my hand still shaking, but with a different kind of tremor now, one of resolve. I scrolled through old contacts, bypassing the numbers I'd memorized at the VA, looking for something outside that toxic sphere. I found a name, Dr. Ramirez, a private trauma specialist someone had recommended years ago, before I even started at the VA clinic. I dialed, my breath catching in my throat. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional. I barely managed to choke out my name. I need help, I said. I need. I need to talk to someone who isn't them. That first session with Dr. Ramirez was excruciating. It felt like tearing open fresh wounds, but she listened without judgment, her gaze steady and unwavering. She didn't try to fix me or offer platitudes. She just let me speak, let me unravel the tangled mess of deceit and betrayal. She helped me understand the insidious nature of psychological abuse, how it slowly erodes your sense of self, making you doubt your own sanity. She helped me see that Chris, while complicit, was also a victim of Eleanor's manipulation, perhaps flattered and confused. That didn't excuse him, but it helped me understand the complexity of the pain, rather than just raw, burning hatred. It was a slow, agonizing climb out of the abyss. Therapy with Dr. Ramirez became my new anchor. I started exercising again, not because I wanted to, but because she told me to. I reconnected with the veterans group, cautiously at first, and found a different kind of solace there. Not just shared trauma, but shared resilience. They didn't push me to talk, but their presence was a silent affirmation that I wasn't alone. I never spoke to Eleanor again. I had her moved from my case, of course, and eventually, I heard she left the VA clinic altogether, though I never learned the full story. I never sought it out. I just wanted her out of my life, out of my head. Chris, that was harder. We had one more conversation, months later. He tried to apologize, tears in his eyes. He said he was sorry, so sorry, that he'd been an idiot, that she'd twisted him around her finger. He genuinely looked broken. But something in me had fractured irrevocably. The trust was gone. The foundation of our friendship, built on shared hell and unspoken understanding, had crumbled. I couldn't look at him without seeing Eleanor's shadow, without feeling the sting of her words. I wished him well, truly, but I couldn't be his rock anymore. I had to be my own, and he had to find his own path to understanding what he'd done. It was the hardest goodbye of my life. The transformation wasn't sudden, like flicking a switch. It was gradual, like the sunrise after a long, dark night. I learned to trust myself again, little by little. I learned to recognize the subtle cues, the insidious whispers that preyed on my vulnerabilities. I learned to set boundaries, not just with others, but with my own fears. The scar of that betrayal will always be there, a faint ache when the weather changes, a ghost of a shadow in the corners of my mind. But it's not a gaping wound anymore. It's a mark of survival. I rebuilt my life, brick by painstaking brick. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding a quiet, unconditional love in the eyes of stray dogs. I went back to school, something I put off for years, studying horticulture, getting my hands dirty, coaxing life from the soil, a stark contrast to the destruction I'd once witnessed. I found new connections, genuine ones, forged in shared interests and mutual respect, not born from trauma or manipulated empathy. I realized that my greatest battle wasn't overseas, in the dust and the heat of combat. It wasn't against an enemy I could see and fight. My greatest battle was within myself, to reclaim my self-worth, to disentangle my identity from the lies of a manipulator, to learn to stand tall and strong, not despite my vulnerabilities, but because I had faced them and overcome them. I still carry the weight of my past, the echoes of war. But now, when those tremors start, I have tools. I have resilience. And I have myself. I am whole, in a way I never was before. Not fixed, not perfect, but fundamentally, unequivocally my own. And that, I've learned, is more than enough.